welcome to my channel. My name is Anne Sapore, and if you are new here, let me tell you a little bit about what we do here. I love to work with fondant, I love to work with wafer paper, I love to work with cake. I just love caking it. And this year, we have decided to have a segment like this where we come to talk about the little issues that disturb us as bakers. Okay, so if you are new here, and you haven't subscribed and you really think this will be good for it or this is it for you, I want you to look below now and click on the subscribe button. And while you're at it, do not forget to click on the notification bell too so that you know when we post amazing videos just like this. You could also share it on all your social media platforms, give us a thumbs up and drop your comments. React. We'd love to hear your questions. We would like to answer to them and we would love to just generally love hear from you. So today we are going to be treating some what went wrong questions. Okay, as bakers, we always have those days when something just goes wrong and you're wondering, what did I do wrong? Okay, so those are the questions we are going to be treating today in our baking segment. Okay, so the first question we are going to be treating is, my cake sank in the middle or in the center and is ooey gooey. What went wrong? You know that kind of cake that bakes all around but refuses to bake in the center, and you are wondering, what could I have done wrong? Your cake is definitely undercooked. So one of the things that you could have done wrong is, one, your oven was too hot. And when the oven is too hot, that means that it baked very, very, very fast around the edges and couldn't get to bake the center. And so when the edges are done, it becomes almost impossible to cook the center. So what do? Bake with a moderately hot oven. Make sure that you use an oven thermometer and get an even temperature. If your oven is faulty, then you should check what is wrong with it. Call somebody to check it out, to fix it and service it for you. Another thing that could have happened is you opened the door, or someone, sometimes when we bake and we have children around, they really want to see what's in the oven. Okay, so it's possible that someone opened the oven door, and when they saw that someone was coming, they slammed the door and ran away. Or it could be you too, you mistakenly opened the door and slammed the oven door, and in the process of doing that, you introduced air into your oven, and that also shook your baking pan. Baking is a science, and once there is an interruption in the process, something goes wrong. As soon as you put your baking pan into the oven, something happens. It starts to rise. It starts to rise. And if you open your oven in that process when your cake is building and rising, it goes back down. Okay, especially if you do it in such a way that it has interrupted and your pan has left or it has moved a bit, it's going to change everything. It's going to be very, very difficult for it to pick up from where it stopped and continue the process of rising. Another thing that could have happened again is, probably you over put the baking powder or the baking soda or whatever leavening that you used. That causes a problem too when there's excessive of it. You know what leavening is all about. It's to help your cake rise. So when it's too much, it goes up and then falls down flat. So make sure you follow your recipe completely. Make sure you close your door gently, and when you put your cake into your oven, please do not be tempted to open. Do not be tempted to pick. Your oven most times is transparent. All you can do is put on your oven light and look into it. You don't need to open it. And if you feel you have children that will disturb the process of your baking, by all means, lock the kitchen door. So that settles the first question. Now we are going to move over to the next question. Why is my cake dry? That is the next question. So I get this question most of the time. Sometimes we use the same recipes and the other person is baking theirs and it's dry. Well, we'll still go back to the oven. You probably baked for too long. When you are baking and after 30 minutes, you start to smell or perceive the aroma of your cake around the house, most often than not. So it is from that time you start checking on your cake, okay? Some cakes bake faster than the others. And most times when you start perceiving this aroma of your cake, it's almost like 30 minutes to 40 minutes. That's when, especially if it's a cake, okay, not cupcake, you start checking from that moment. You look for a knife or a toothpick and put in the center of the cake. If it comes out clean, your cake is ready. If it comes out dirty, as in stained completely, is ready. So now there's something about baking, okay? If your cake comes out, if your knife comes out in the center and it's too clean, you have almost overbaked that cake. Sometimes it's most preferable when you put your knife in the center and you bring it out, let there be tiny, tiny crumbs on your knife. Are you paying attention? Let there be tiny crumbs, tiny, not that ooey gooey kind of feeling on the knife, but maybe tiny, tiny little crumbs still sticking to your knife. That is the best time to bring out your cake because your cake will continue baking even when it's outside of the oven. So now, when you bring your cake and keep it on your tabletop, it's still baking because it's still hot. It's going to complete the baking process and you find out that after a few seconds, put your knife again into that place, it comes out clean. That is when your cake is now perfectly baked. So always make sure that your cake comes out the way I have just stated. Also, if your oven is not faulty, sometimes the recipe may be faulty, okay? The recipe may be such that the moisture in the cake is not enough so that it comes out dry. And in most cases, those kind of cakes will require the simple sugar syrup. It needs a syrup to be added to it to soften it up. Maybe that is the intent of the original recipe. You bring it out, and when you are ready to frost it or eat it, you introduce your sugar syrup to it. So that is the reason why your cake will be dry. So if you feel that your recipe is a little bit faulty and your intent was not to use sugar syrup when your cake is out of the oven, then you should add a little bit more of moisture. Perhaps if you were using one half cup of milk, you can make it 1 cup. Or if there were 8 eggs, you can decide to make it 9 eggs, just to introduce a little bit more moisture to your cake. So now we are going to be moving over to the next. Why are my cake edges so dark? I get that all the time. And if you watched my previous video, one of the culprits of having dark edges is the kind of pan that you are using. I mentioned in my other video that the pans that we use play a very big role in our baking. There are some pans that resist the heat coming to your cake, okay? It resists it, it introduces just a little so that when you are done baking, the actual heat that comes in contact with your cake is so minimal that your cake comes out clean. When I mean clean, I mean not too brown. But your cake can be brown, but not excessively. Because the reason your cake is getting brown is actually because of the sugar content in your cake. The sugar is caramelizing. I hope I got that English right. Caramelizing. Oh, that's much. Okay, your sugar is caramelizing, and thereby it has to make the edges of your cake a little bit brown. So check your pans. In Nigeria, we have pans made from rooftops, roofing sheets rather, and these pans make cake edges excessively dry. Sorry, excessively brown. I have checked that. So when you are baking with those kind of pans, you have to be monitoring your cakes, okay? Make sure they don't bake too much, and also make sure that the heat in your oven is moderate. Another thing that could cause this is overcrowding. When your oven is overcrowded, the heat is not flowing where everywhere that it should go. So probably some cakes get the heat more, and so they don't bake at the same way that the others are baking. And those particular kind of cakes, they tend to bake faster and get brown, excessive brown edges. Okay, so they will brown more than the other. So that's basically why your cakes will get brown edges. So we are going to be moving to the next. So another common question is, why does my cake have holes or tunnels? Okay, so sometimes you bake and when you cut it, you see so many holes and bubbles everywhere. Some of them are so big, they are like tunnels where worms can go through them. Okay, well, that I'm exaggerating. Okay, so what causes that? The first one is probably you didn't mix your batter properly. You undermixed it. You just, you were maybe probably too afraid to mix it. You poured it into your pan and then you just put it in your oven. The end result will be big tunnels. So, in the same way we undermix, we overmix. Sometimes, especially when you introduce your flour to your batter, you have to become slow, slow, slow. You have to go slow. Baba, go slow. Go slow. You don't. mm, mm, if you are using a mixer, you don't use the highest speed. That is when you start with your lowest speed if you must use your mixer. Most often than not, when I'm not mixing a large batch of butter, I prefer to, when I pour my butter, when I start introducing my flour into the creamed mixture, I prefer to go with my hand, okay, because I know that I'm going to go slowly. My mixer may not be slow enough sometimes. Sometimes there's a surge in the power supply and the mixer goes brrrr, and you don't want that, okay? So sometimes if what I'm mixing is not so much, I go with my hands, with my spatula, or if I must use my mixer, I make sure that it is really, really slow, especially when you introduce your flour. Your flour contains, as soon as it gets mixed up with water, it starts produces what we call gluten. Okay, so it is that gluten structure that starts building up and building up. You don't want to do it excessively because it is what makes your cake dense. When it is you have overbuilt, in the course of mixing, you have overbuilt that gluten structure. You don't want that. So you make sure that you mix gently and slowly. Okay, so now sometimes you have done all that, you have mixed slowly, you have done everything. The next thing you should do just before you put your cake into the oven, your batter into the oven, tap your pan on the table slightly. Okay, those things you are seeing in your cake are as a result of excessive air bubbles that have been introduced in the course of mixing. So sometimes even when you are small, you still introduce air bubbles into your batter. So but when you hit your pan gently on your table, you see those bubbles popping. Sometimes just be very observant, you see those bubbles popping out. So make sure that you always tap your pan gently on your table or on the floor before you put your pan into the oven. You'll find out that those excessive air bubbles are gone and you bake a cake that is free from all those tunnels. So now we are going to be moving over to the next. Why is my cake crumbling and like it crumbling, falling apart when I'm trying to frost it, especially when you are trying to compose or you are trying to, yes, compose, you find out that your cake, there are so many crumbs around your cake. Number one, you didn't cool your layers of cake before starting. Maybe your cake is still warm, happens that way. So I had a teacher who always tells me that whenever I'm done baking, put your cake in the fridge for at least 15 minutes. Okay, when before you start, put it in your fridge for about 15 minutes to cool down. So when you put your cake in the fridge, it kind of firms it up a little bit, okay? And they become ready for you to frost. It even becomes easier. Sometimes when you are trying to trim around the sides of your cake, you find out, especially if your cake are so moist, you find out that you cut more than you need. That's because your cake is still a little bit warm. So, but if you put it in the freezer or in the fridge for about 15 minutes, okay, you find out that when you want to cut around or when you want to frost, it becomes easier to do that. I hope that settles that question. So we are going to be moving over to the next question. The next question is, my cake does not demold. Is there any English like that? Okay. Or it doesn't come out properly after it has baked. It's always getting stuck to the pan. Sister, brother, this one is very easy. You did not grease your pan properly. That is your only problem. Look, whenever you bake or you want to bake, you have to properly grease your pan with uh, uh, with butter or with whatever it is that you have. There's what we call oil spray or whatever. You can use that, but make sure that your pan is properly greased. Okay, there are two different ways that you can grease your pan, or you can prepare your pan for baking. You can rub some butter around it, and then you carry some flour and sprinkle on it and take out the excess, and your pan is ready. Or you can grease your pan with your butter thoroughly and then you line it up with baking sheets. Okay, there are some recipes that even if you grease your pan and just flour it, is not enough. You have to use baking sheets underneath it, especially for batters that are more liquid in nature. Some batters are more liquid in nature than others. Okay, those kind of batters, if you have them, I always advise, make sure that you use baking paper. Buy baking paper. Always have it in your office or studio or baking room. Before you put those kind of batters in your pan, make sure that you butter your pan properly, and then use your baking sheet. Add some butter on your baking sheet again before you finally pour in your batter. In that way, your cake will never ever get stuck to the bottom of your pan anymore. Okay. So, but if adventure, after you have done all this, sometimes when your cakes have been left to cool in your pan overnight, they get stuck to your pan. Okay, so in that case, you have done everything properly, yet it has stuck. So the easiest thing to do is, maybe you can just carry your pan and pass it over fire. You can just light your burner. Okay, take your pan and just maybe hold it over the fire. It loosens up the stuck cake. Okay, it loosens, maybe it's just the oil that has become stuck, so you just put it over the fire and it loosens it up, and then you can flip it over. Sometimes maybe you don't need that. If your pan is such that it's well covered at the bottom, you can just place that pan over hot water for maybe about 1 minute to 2 minutes. You turn, and then you can flip your cake over. Or before you do that, you can just take your knife, run it all around the sides of your cake, and then just flip your cake over and it flips over. So I hope I have been able to settle some questions or answer some questions. If you have some questions that you would like me to answer, please just drop them in the comment section, and then in our next question and answer segment, I'm going to be treating them. Meanwhile, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have subscribed. I hope you have dropped your comment, and please hit the like button so that YouTube can show my videos to so many people who need answers to their questions. Thank you so much for watching. I remain and